but the main thing that I was looking for was just a close game, and boy, did we get it.
Ash is a Diamonds player. She could go to any of these clubs and be a starting goalkeeper and getting more game time and getting better going up against the Janelles every single week, or the Shimonas or the Grey.
I think there've been a few people calling for Joe Weston's Diamonds dress to maybe get hung up. I think she's again gone out and proved that no, she's well and truly still up there as one of our best goal defenders, and I think she was probably almost a little bit robbed of that Player of the Match award.
You can't go past what Paige did this year. I think she has definitely been the primo Australian player in the competition for me personally. Well, kia ora Netball Scoop whānau, and welcome back to the Netball Scoop YouTube channel. My name is Toby, and I'm once again joined with Georgia Doyle for our recap of what was an insane grand final of the SSN 2025 season. I mean, I don't think a lot of people were expecting it to be that close. And let's just say, if you watched last week's video, I ended up predicting it right. So I feel pretty good about myself this week. So, Georgia, what are your thoughts on that grand final?
Yeah, I mean, like you've said, I don't think there were many people out there that said it would go that way. I know obviously last week I said that it would go to the Fever, but I would like to put it out there on record that on the night I was wearing Vixens merch. I was cheering for the Vixens, and if you look at my official netball tipping competition that I do, I tipped the Vixens by 2. So I'm more than happy to whack the screenshot up there for people that don't believe me. But no, I was absolutely stoked that the Vixens got the win. But the main thing that I was looking for was just a close game, and boy, did we get it. I think, that was something I talked about last week about how the last couple of years, the last couple of finals games, the Vixens have really come out and surprised people. Started off with that grand final performance last year to get oh so close to the Thunderbirds but just fall short. And then this year, they've done it the hard way. They've fought back from 4th. They're only the second team in the competition after the Sunshine Coast Lightning did it in 2018 to go and win the flag from that 4th spot, and basically been playing do or die netball for the last couple of weeks, not only in finals but even for the back half of their season in order to get themselves there. And, the better team won on the day. I think Fever probably struggled with that intensity that got brought to them, because I think most of us can be pretty upfront and say that they've sort of sailed through that back half of the season. They haven't really been tested. So it almost seemed like when they were tested, they didn't quite know what to do, and it sort of all unraveled for them. So what were your initial thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I thought definitely watching that game at the beginning, it was very nervy. You could tell that both sides were just throwing the ball away a little bit too much. And you could see that it was going to be a game of those experienced players being able to really show their stuff. And I think the Vixens definitely have a lot more experience in those high pressure situations, I guess, with the current crop of players that they have. So I think I ended up seeing that a lot of people in the end actually started predicting the Vixens as soon as they arrived at that arena, and I think there was definitely some momentum, I guess, for the Vixens during, not only before the game but during that game. You could see that they were slowly um, getting their way around the Fever and not as necessarily scared of the Fever brand that a lot of teams this season after Janelle came back have been. Um, and I think, the big players stood up. And I think that's a great thing to see, especially going into that international season where a lot of those Diamonds players, where we thought maybe they've been a little bit rusty or not in form, really showed their stuff. And I think that is going to make this international season very, very interesting. So, Georgia, I'll pass it on to you, I think, just to start off our dissection. What do you think in that first quarter allowed the Vixens to, at least start building their momentum despite it being a pretty close first quarter?
Yeah, I think like you said, there was just that extra bit of experience in the Vixens camp. The majority of all of those players were involved in their premiership fight last year. Whereas the Fever had, I think it was only 4 players that have actually played Super Netball finals before, as we know a couple of years ago. Or sorry, Super Netball Grand Finals it must be, because they've been in finals for the last couple of years. but that experience showed. I think in particular, Jordan Kranzberg in the middle will certainly be going back and reflecting a bit on that game. She was probably a little bit messier with the ball in hand than she would have liked to be, and especially in that first quarter, and especially in a grand final game against a team that's as quality as the Vixens. Any little chance you give them, they're going to pounce and they're going to pick up that turnover. As we know, pickups are one of the Vixens' top priorities. So any loose ball, they're going to get. Any chance you give them to snatch on a ball, they're going to take it. And then I think another player who typically has sort of risen to the occasion in the big games, but didn't necessarily in this game, was their captain, Jess Anstis. She's been known for having big games against players, particularly on the likes of Liz Watson. She was probably one of the first players a couple of years ago to really shut her down back when Liz was playing at the Vixens. And I think, yeah, she probably wasn't able to have the impact that she wanted, even though there were two wing attacks that she went up against, starting against Zara Walters and then switching on for Hannah Mundy. Usually that would be seen as sort of a compliment to have two different players put up against you. But I really think it was more just that Simone was wanting to be able to put Hannah Mundy out there, knowing that both her and Zara have got both such quality play between them. But Hannah had obviously missed those last couple of weeks. So yeah, I think those are two players that potentially wanted to step up a little bit more. And then you've got to look at someone like Janelle. She scored 51 from 51, which is a really impressive score in the pressure of a grand final. But she did finish up with 4 general play turnovers, which for a player of Janelle's caliber is just unheard of, really, in such a pressure game. And yes, a lot of that came down to the work that was being done outside by that Vixens defensive trio. They were absolutely monstrous. Rudy Ellis probably played the best game of her career, I would say. And to, pull that out in a grand final against someone like Janelle is a pretty impressive feat. And then I think there'd been a few people calling for Joe Weston's diamonds dress to maybe get hung up. I think she's again gone out and proved that no, she's well and truly still up there as one of our best goal defenders. And I think she was probably almost a little bit robbed of that player of the match award. I know Kira Austin came away with it, which you were probably pretty stoked with, knowing that that's who you tipped for it to get last week. I could just hear your little smug voice in my head when it
Yeah,
got announced. I was like, oh no, Toby's never going to let me hear the end of
I
that.
did. I did say it was the boring choice. So let's just say I did end up picking Kate. So we'll be 50-50, right?
So yeah, I just think that defensive work that was done right from that very first whistle by the Vixens, and then I think probably the last point that I'll talk about now is just their willingness to attack the super shot in that very first quarter. Vixens have, the last couple of games, they've had to really reel themselves back into it, especially last week using that super shot. And Kira Austin's confidence to just go to the post early in the game when they were sort of, I think they were behind when they first went for it, but it would have been very easy. Oh, we've still got 3 quarters left to go. Let's wait and see how the rest of the game pans out. I'm going to back my defenders to win enough ball. But when you've got your defenders going up against that Fever attacking line, you can't really rely on them to win that much ball back, knowing how dominant Janelle normally is. So she
Mm.
took the game by the scruff of the neck early on, went for those super shots, and that was able to sort of push their lead out. And then the only attempt at the super shot that Fever had was right in that last quarter, and that was by Janelle trying to come in and save the day. I think when Dan Ryan brought on Liv Wilkinson partway through that third quarter, that was probably the tactical move that he was going for, trying to then get her in the game and attack the post from a bit of range to try and shoot some of those 2-point shots. But she didn't even put up a long range shot the time that she was on court. She got 2 from 3 from regular range. And she was also one that, yeah, finished with 5 turnovers. So in her 23 minutes on court, she's only young. She's only 21. She's eligible for that World Youth Cup that's happening in a couple of months. But yeah, I think the output that she put out on court compared to what we've seen from her for the rest of the season, I think is probably also one that's gonna be a lot of learnings from it. But yeah, hopefully she's able to bounce back and then come back even stronger for it next year.
Yeah, I think when I was watching that first quarter, definitely like the inexperience of Jordan Kranzberg was something that I definitely highlighted too. I think she was, throwing that wayward ball a little bit. You could see that there was a little bit of nerves. And also Kate Maloney, once again, who I predicted to be MVP, was also running around her. And I think um, definitely if I was the coach of the Fever, I definitely probably would have seen if I could bring Jess Anstis into centre just to create something a little bit different. I think you could tell early on that she was almost wrapped up in the moment. She did end up playing a pretty good game near the end, but I think just as that beginning half was quite a struggle for her. And looking at the first quarter score, 17-16 to the Vixens, and then that second quarter score, 16-15. And I think, you know, there were several times during that first quarter where the Fever were actually out in front by a couple of goals, and it was that super shot period where the Vixens were able to bring that back through. And I think like the strategy of the Vixens during that game was quite clear. You could see what they were doing, where the Fever just seemed to be, we're just going to go for one and hope for the best. And there wasn't necessarily that urgency to go, okay, this is a grand final, and maybe this might be a time that, we've been pretty good all season, just almost not coasting, but, providing that, 1 point option. Maybe today is the day where we actually go attack that super shot a little bit early just to expand our lead and put pressure on the Vixens early on. And yeah, I think that was potentially what Shanice might have actually have been trying to do, but I think Joe Weston was just completely all over her. And I think as well, Rudy Ellis being quite relentless on Janelle meant that, they just went, okay, let's just go for the ones and hope for the best. But that is the aim of the game, isn't it? Is to try and figure out that balance. So what do you think, I guess, or do you think that the Fever could have done early in the game that would have set them up a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, other than potentially sort of attacking that super shot a little bit earlier, that could have, given them that little bit of a psychological edge, I guess, of knowing that they were gonna potentially try and come back with those shots. I think, you look at those first two quarters, they were only, Vixens were only up by two at half time. So there wasn't actually a huge amount of stuff that was necessarily going wrong for the Fever. I can't remember exactly who had which, who had the first centre pass for each quarter, but one goal difference that comes down to a centre pass, so that's not sort of a massive tactical thing that falls apart. I guess that's just the flow of the game. It was that third quarter where it sort of, I say, blew open. Vixens won that quarter by 3, so it's still not a massive margin that they were able to get out by. But just looking at the whole game stats, which is something that obviously, each quarter builds onto. But if we look at our centre pass to goal rate, they were both pretty similar. Fever actually dominated that one, which is something that I'd be fairly safe to bet they've probably dominated all year. 77% centre pass to goal conversion, which is a pretty decent number. Vixens were down a little bit at 72, but then the one that I really want to look at, both teams got a pretty decent number of gains, but the Fever only managed to score off 67% of those, while the Vixens managed to score off 83. So just that discipline, I think that the Fever probably lacked. They were winning back plenty of ball. Both Katie Ann and Sunday got back a couple of games, and then obviously you had Fran Williams as well, who made a few little cameos. I was surprised she didn't spend more time against Sophie Garvin, actually. Katie Ann does often struggle against that more of a sort of moving type shooter. So I thought we might have seen Fran a little bit earlier than we did, but also I know that the long reach of Katie Ann can often put off those Vixens shooters, so I can sort of see what Dan was going for there. But yeah, Fever had 9 gains and the Vixens only had 8. So the Fever actually had more of them. They just weren't able to convert. So if there'd only been a couple of more of those that they'd been able to take through to goal, it's that, that very, Dan Ryan kind of, you got to punish them, that sort of grit moment, all those sort of buzzwords that he really likes to use. I think they just quite weren't able to get themselves in the zone, and whether that's maybe because, like I mentioned, they'd had sort of a cruisy weekend. Everyone always says you learn a lot more from a loss than you do from a win. And the Fever have only had 2 losses, and they were both back when they didn't have Janelle playing for them, so they haven't really had the chance to sort of fight their way through a game since Janelle's been back. So I think, yeah,
Mm,
probably that lack of intense preparation. And no one's going to go into a grand final assuming that you've won it already before the game started, but you can certainly go in with maybe an sort of unreasonable amount of confidence that then when you do all of a sudden get challenged, it's like, oh, actually we weren't really prepared for this. We don't really have a plan B or plan C to be able to go to. We just expected plan A to be able to get us home in this game. Unfortunately, it didn't, and the Vixens were able to come home with the win.
yeah, and I'm looking at the Vixen stats now, and you would think that based on, once again, I talked about this during our season review, and I also talked about this as a reason that the Vixens may lose their finals games this year, which is that, that high turnover rate between the shooters. And last week they did a really good job connecting. And I think once again this week that could have definitely have played out differently if the Fever almost weren't too nervous at the beginning. You look at their stats, and Sophie Garvin and Kira Austin had 14 turnovers between the two of them. Kira Austin had 8, while Sophie had 6. And I understand that their offensive workload is very high for the Vixens. I mean, they actually rely a lot on each other in comparison to maybe those two wing attack and centers. But then you look at during this game, Zara Walters played for 37 minutes. She had 24 feeds, 17 centre pass receives. She had 13 goal assists, and she only had one turnover. So she actually, on paper, would have been averaging their highest offensive stats throughout the game. So to think that she only had one turnover and they brought her off for Hannah Mundy, who ended up being on and only getting uh, 10 centre pass receives, 9 feeds, 6 goal assists, and 3 turnovers. So to me, that seems a bit like, why would you have made the change and kept the change, I guess? Because you had Zara Walters who performed brilliantly. And then Hannah Mundy on, obviously stats don't tell everything. So there's obviously that off the ball work that she was doing that was really strong. But if you looked at her stats alone, I would have believed that you would have taken her off earlier based on what she was averaging, just to give them something different. I guess they could have easily actually blown out that scoreline a little bit more if they were a bit cleaner with the ball and also had the players who are clean with the ball on the court.
Yeah, and I mean, the Fever came back into it in that last quarter. They won that by 4. They very almost snatched victory right at the end there, or sent them into extra time, which would have been, the second grand final in 3 years to go to extra time. That would have just been absolutely unreal. But yeah, that last quarter was when they finished with 2. KDM was able to come out and get 2 gains for the Fever. And yeah, that was when they really seemed to sort of tidy everything up. And that's then when the Vixens conversely started to sort of not necessarily panic, but they were just getting a little bit more wobbly than they had been before. And speaking of that goal assist stat, I think one of the ones that we mentioned how strong Zara was in that area in particular. Then you had Hannah Mundy, who came on, only had the 6 in her time on court. She had 22 or 24 minutes she played. Um, Kate Maloney, as we know, very dominant in the centre, typically has been more of a sort of defensive player, but since Liz Watson's left to move up to the Sunshine Coast, Kate has taken on more of that attacking load. In 60 minutes of netball, she only had 6 goal assists, which, that did normally be something that you'd be like, oh my gosh, what are we doing leaving her on there? But that just shows all the other work that she does. And I think a bit of that Vixen's game plan as well, especially once they got to that time where they were wanting to shoot for the 2s. I think we spoke about it in one of our review chats earlier this year, might have been to do with the Lightning and the amount of feeds Liz Watson has compared to her goal assists. But yeah, just the amount of times that they were having to reset the ball as the game went on to try and get them into that correct shooting position. Yeah, for someone like Kate Maloney to have 6 goal assists from 18 feeds, I just thought was quite an unusual one for her, knowing that she's usually pretty good at getting those players set up in that perfect shooting position.
Yeah, and I mean, in the end, that grand final ended up having the scoreline 59-58 in that thrilling last quarter where the Fever almost looked like they finally clicked and were very much pressuring whatever the Vixens were putting out there. I think something that for me, the Fever just did lack was in that last quarter that could have probably sent them over at the edge would have been someone in that goal defense position who got gained ball. I know that Sunday had been cut out a little bit by Kira Austin's impact. She seemed to really elevate her game, but Fran Williams had a couple of stints on the court, got 0 gained ball, really relied on her partner to um, generate ball early or generate the turnover. I think Fran ended up almost being a little bit ineffective during that game or being cancelled out by whoever her opposition was. Um, so definitely something that for next year, they have a lot of options. The Fever with Ruth Ariang also probably going to be coming back next season. Trying to figure out a way to, I guess, keep all these defensive options because I think there is a massive strength to their game as having those 4 defensive options that they can maneuver around and they provide all something very different. But for 2026, they'll be pretty confident with their attack end. I think they'll be pretty confident with their midcourt after the consistency they've had this year. I think where they are the potential to grow and grow and grow is that defensive end for them.
Yeah, I think I was surprised that we maybe didn't see Sunday Ariang pushed out to that wing defence position. It's not an unusual
Mm,
spot there to be, and especially when Jordan Kranzberg was getting that little bit lost in the middle there, like you'd mentioned earlier. You could have shifted Anstis into the centre, brought Ariang out to that wing defence, and then put Fran into goal defence. And yeah, I think that would have just given him something different. I think Fever, as you said, have got that such depth of a defensive lineup that it's almost confusing about who to put where. But when you've got that
mm.
options, you might as well test them, knowing that it's worked for you before. And yeah, give Fran that little bit more room to get out and run around and yeah, really try and grind down a player like Austin.
Yeah, and I think, on a season reflection as a whole for the Vixens as well, I think, they'll be looking at 2026, different coach. A lot of their players haven't necessarily re-signed that we have knowledge to as of yet. And you can see our signing docs on the Netball Scoop website, who is currently already signed. And we'll be continuously updating that throughout the signing period when we have new additions. And we hope there'll be a lot of new additions for certain teams. But yeah, the Vixens, we have no necessarily knowledge as to who will be in that team next year. So they are potentially a team that, next year they'll be looking for consistency throughout the entire season. I think this year they obviously had those four losses and two wins to begin the season, and then they grew and grew and grew and ended up, you know, only losing one or two on the trot and then winning 8 games in a row. So I think, they'll definitely be looking for obviously to continue what they've done. They probably won't want to change a whole lot. But they also, I think, will be reflective on their season going, why did we struggle so much at the beginning? What did we do during preseason that just didn't click for us to be game day ready during the first half of the season? And yeah, I think, yeah, there might be, they won't be able to keep all of their depth, I don't believe. I think a lot of teams will be looking at some of their depth. Definitely Zara Walters, I think, with Hannah Mundy, Kate Maloney, Kate Eddy as their starting midcourt. And they've been quite consistently in those positions the last couple of years. I think Zara Walters, who's been performing like amazingly, especially with her lack of experience, could go to a team that has, wing attack center problem like the Firebirds, like the Giants, and could thrive. And I know that a lot of players in SSN nowadays do stay at clubs for loyalty and for friends and the environment that you're in. So that makes perfect sense if they end up getting the whole squad back together and whatnot. But I think realistically, for a development of Zara Walters, she definitely will want to be looking for more game time and going for one of those other SSN clubs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that one. You looked Hannah Mundy definitely dominated the court time throughout the year, but then Zara Walters able to come in, these last two finals games to get them to the grand final and then play more than half of that grand final and come up with better stats than Hannah did in the game. As we've said already, stats aren't everything, but yeah, having Zara sitting on the bench certainly seems like a waste of a starting seventh spot. But we're also seeing more and more these days that coaches are more willing to start there, not necessarily have a set starting seven. It'll often come down to matchups or coaches are more willing to sort of bring the changes that little bit earlier. So it's not so much of an important move of, oh, I've got to move to get court time because I'm still going to get a little bit while I'm here. Like we've just seen announced today, Ash Irvin has re-signed with the Lightning, knowing that she's going to be presumably sitting behind or at least alongside Courtney Bruce. But she's obviously happy in that position, knowing that she offers something different to Courtney. So maybe we do potentially see Zara hang around for another year. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, do you think though that, in this scenario where the likes of Ash Irvin is sitting behind Courtney Bress or, interchangeable, you also have other scenarios throughout the competition where, there are quite a few Australian players competing with Australian players rather than competing with imports. I think, with this influx of imports that happen in the SSN, plus, the addition that there is going to be potentially, we actually don't know how many New Zealand players are going to come over, but there is very likelihood that there'll be a few more New Zealand players coming over. Don't Australia want them to be, I guess, having Australians in, you know, spots of concern for their future. I mean, instead of bringing them over as imports. For example, I think you look at the Diamond squad that we'll put up a graphic here so that you can see what the Diamond squad is. I think we ended up highlighting that goal attack was a bit of an issue in our review of it. We also know that wing attack is a position that has, besides Georgie Horgis, has quite a few older or more experienced options. And you look at the SSN teams, and I would only highlight Horgis as someone for the future. They don't really have, like, currently someone that you'd be like, yep, that's an Australian diamond that's coming through. And because we've seen it through their experience, I guess, or game time in the SSN competition, that they'll be able to step up at diamonds. Don't we want to be having something where, you know, the Zara Walters, the Ash Irvin almost get like a guaranteed spot because Ash is a Diamonds player. She could go to any of these clubs and be a starting goalkeeper and getting more game time and getting better going up against the Janelles every single week or the Shimonas or the Grace or you know what I mean? I think
Mm.
there's just something that is almost, you know, the SSN competition at the beginning was about bringing the best players over in the world, but also aiding that Australian development. Where I think, you know, with this influx of import players that has now happened, and also this uncertainty around the what is the reserves competition and kind of how it works, that we're almost saying we've got an Australian Diamond invitee in the reserves competition where she could have a spot in the SSN. So, where do you see that balance, I guess, for the future of the SSN competition?
I suppose the one thing that I would then flag is almost probably something that has been spoken about widely in the netball world this year was, Julie Fitzgerald bringing over Casey Kopwa to then fill that
Mm,
role in the Giants, knowing that Erin wasn't ready to take on that starting goalkeeper bib or starting goal defense bib, whatever it was, on her own. She needed someone else there to sort of hold her hand, guide her along the way, and look at what it did for her. So, it's all well and good saying that, oh, yes, look, there's this amazing young player, but she still needs that bit of help and guidance. I think Ash Irvin's still only 22. So she's
mm,
still young and would be learning a lot from Courtney. It reminds me actually of a couple of years ago in Rudy Ellis, who, as we know, just had a phenomenal game in the grand final. She moved from the Firebirds over to the Fever, knowing that Courtney Bruce was already there as your starting goalkeeper and she was with the Diamonds at the time. She was not going to be getting that starting goalkeeper bid, but she knew she would be able to learn so much, not only from training alongside Courtney, but also getting to play up against Janelle. And look what it's done for her now. She's been able
mm.
to then move over to the Vixens, take all that stuff that she's learned from that time, and then continued to learn in her time at the Vixens team as well. But I think a lot of the young players these days are sort of realizing that you've got to sort of earn your court time, and they'd much rather spend that bit of time doing a sort of an apprenticeship as such under a more experienced player. Knowing that it's then going to potentially get them further down the road, or then when they do step into that starting position, they're going to have the experience to back them up and they're not just going to sort of crumble underneath it because they're prepared for it.
So then my question is to you, I guess in the scenario of Ash Irvin being re-signed by the Lightning, do you think Ash is ready for a starting goalkeeper position, despite potentially having to share her game time with Courtney Bruce?
I don't know.
It's a hard
I
one,
mean,
hey?
yeah, and I mean, if you look at all the other goalkeepers that are out there, there's probably, I mean, as we know, Liv Lewis has just stepped back
Hmm.
from netball. She's going to be playing in the AFLW next year, and then the other one who's around, who's potentially maybe also not solidified a starting seven spot, would be Isabel Shearer at the Firebirds. So that's two other potential spots that realistically, if you're looking at the talent we've got out there that are sitting on the bench, would be your Ash Irvins and your Tegan O'Shaughnessy at the Swifts. So
Hmm.
they moved. But I believe Tegan O'Shaughnessy's also been confirmed for the Swifts. Don't quote me on that.
I
I'm not
saw something about
100%
that too.
sure. Yeah, but I feel like she's also opting to stay at the Swifts, again, knowing that she's going to be sat behind Sarah Clow. So I certainly think there's a lot more that goes into making these decisions and then obviously just the court time, as you've mentioned, the culture and all that sort of stuff side of it goes with it as well. But yeah, there probably are two players. I would say Ash Irvin and Tegan O'Shannessy are both stronger players than Liv Lewis and Isabel Shearer, as noted by the fact that they're obviously either Diamond squad members or Diamond's invitees, versus the other two. But they obviously feel happy and confident in their decision that they're going to still have more success or have a more enjoyable season at the teams they've decided to stay at, rather than moving just for the sake of some court time.
Yeah, I think it is a very interesting conversation because I think there maybe just the netball fan in me, I guess, is, just remembering like maybe 5, 10 years ago where, you moved for court time because you knew that that's what built your experience. But I guess there is that evolving that, necessarily that if you do have one star player, it doesn't mean you're not going to get on court at all. I think there is that evolving nature of netball where, um, you're more willing to use your 10. And despite it being quite common knowledge that the less you make substitutions and the less you make, changes throughout a game, usually will mean that you win. But I think, with this evolving nature of having more specialist players in uh, that 5 minute period at the end of every game, in the goal attack position, I think as well, that can also relate to who's better to defend that super shot during that 5 minute period too and whatnot. So we love that netball's evolving and it will continue to evolve and create new strategies, I guess, as time goes along. So I think while we've had our discussion about the grand final and a little bit about that re-signing period, I think we've got a couple of things that we also want to address, which is Georgia mentioned last week, which was our team of the year. And
Mm.
I know that for mine, there was one position I really struggled with, but team of the year. We're not going to talk about finals form. It's going to be purely season form. So when you look at, potentially some selection, you go, why didn't you not pick Kira Austin because she was the best in the, final series? We're picking purely off the season form. So when I did mine, I put Grace at goal shooter. This time around, you can't go past Janelle. Um, so I've been converted back to the normal side. I think she was incredible this season, despite what she went through early on. Her ability to come back was incredible after what she went through, and I know that in the finals game, she actually talked with Sue Gordian about not necessarily processing what she's been through over the last 13 weeks and just being like, all I did was just focus on the netball. And um, I think after this grand final, pending on the results, she said that she was going to spend some time to actually reflect on how proud of herself she was and also, go through the motions of whatever happens after, committing yourself so fully to something like that. But I think her gameplay this year was incredible. She held very strong. She was the number one for Nissa net point. She was number one for goals scored, despite missing 2 games. You can't deny her impact, and I know we've talked about it in the MVP race. In a couple of episodes ago where, it was hard to figure out who was the best out of her or Latanya, despite missing 2 games. So definitely can't go past her being goal shooter of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I echo absolutely everything you've said there. Yeah, her dominance ever since she returned in that round 3 match, which was, funnily enough, against the Vixens in Melbourne. Bit of a full circle moment for her there, then finishing out the season, but obviously the result not quite going her way. Yeah, I don't think we can neglect or anyone can neglect the emotional toll that all the stuff that she went through in the preseason, as well as then that return to court would have taken on her and on the team as well. As we all know, Fever are a very tight-knit team, and especially that sort of core Jamaican group that you've got there of her, Shanice, and Katie Ann. So yeah, I think her strength and her willpower to get out there and perform as she did, I reckon she's probably had a career best season. So yeah,
Mm,
I certainly think you'd be able to poll pretty much any netball fan out there, and they'd all be putting Janelle as their goal shooter for the year without a doubt.
yeah, and I think let's give some quick honorable mentions as well. We're not going to do this for everyone, by the way, so it's not going to drag on. But I think you can't go past Shimona Jock and Grace Nowicki as well this season. I think they were incredible for what they did for their teams. I think, Shimona really Well, they both actually. They're both quite similar in their roles, I guess, this year. That they both really anchored a, struggling attacking from the previous year. They really elevated their work, and I think they were very consistent, both averaging around 45 to 50 goals a game. So that's massive for a player. Not that's usually only expected to be one player in a competition, let alone three. So yeah, I definitely wanted to give a special mention to them as well. Now we move on to goal attack. And for everyone where I said I struggled with one position, this is the one. Because I think this was the position that, if you saw Netball Scoop's MVP document as well, article, sorry, we only had 1 point out of, I think it was like, what, 200 or something points that went
Mm.
to a goal attack. And let's just say it wasn't me who gave Kira Austin that 1 point. I've almost refused almost to give her my goal attack spot just based on the amount of turnover she ended up getting this year. Um, so I'm going to pass to Georgia and I'm going to try and get convinced by what she says her goal attack is.
I mean, I think the two I was tossing up between, I had Helen Housby in there in my first half of the year. She's not getting in there again. I
Mm.
think she really faded in that second half of the year, as did most of that Swift's attacking end, to be quite honest. That doesn't all fall on Housby's shoulders, of course. There's a whole team of players around her who probably all failed to reach their expectations or their sort of the heights that we know they're able to in that second half of the year. So that left me with a few other options, and I was tossing it up between Lauren Frew and Kira Austin, who, as Toby said, he's not going to give it to Kira, and I think a bit of recency bias does come into it. As we know, Kira obviously had a phenomenal finals campaign, but did sort of struggle in that back half of the season. But I think that is still who I'm going to give my vote to. I think second half of the season she definitely came into her own a little bit more and probably was the steadier out of the two attackers in that Vixen circle, and even between her and Frew as well. I also think Frew didn't quite see as much court time in that second half of the year. We were seeing more of Georgie shifting into that goal attack position. If she spent more time there, I would have loved to give it to Georgie. I just don't feel like she spent
Mm.
enough time in that goal attack position to justify her selection there. But yeah, I think the Thunderbirds were taking Frew out of goal attack a lot more to put Georgie on, and that's when they tended to do better, which obviously showed that her in that goal attack position wasn't quite what they needed. So, yeah, potentially controversial, but I am going to put Kira in there. But, yeah, certainly think that prior to finals, there would have still been some games that she's looking back on and wishing that she'd done better. But as we've said, consistency across that goal attack bib just was not there throughout the season. And, yeah, this was definitely the toughest one to come to a decision for.
Yeah, well, looking at mine, I also put Helen Helsby, and I don't think I can do that either. I just don't think that, especially that second half of the year, but also even in the first half of the year, I think a lot of her strength actually just came from the players around her. I think she had a high attacking workload during, those first couple of rounds, but definitely dropped off as the season went along, and I think that was one of the reasons why the sort of consistency almost went down during that second half of the year and finals. For me, I did think about putting Georgie, and I was told I wasn't allowed. So I
I don't think I
have to.
told you in that. I just advised against it.
I got told that she didn't spend enough time there, so I am going to go with Lauren Frew. I think, um, to me, the Thunderbirds' goal attack was a very essential position for them, stabilizing their attacking, especially with Shamira gone, so they didn't have necessarily as many defensive opportunities, despite still having Latanya be a absolute killer player and getting a lot of defensive ball. I think, though, that with the combined with lesser ball than they had last season, I think they really needed to be anchored by someone in that attacking end. And I think, as we saw, Romelda wasn't necessarily up to her, best this season, but she still provided, good support. I think Georgie um, wasn't it necessarily as strong this season in a wing attack for me personally. I think, last season she was just absolutely electric. And, but I think this year, one of their strengths was that goal attack position. Whoever was in goal attack for the Thunderbirds was going to get my vote. And so, since I wasn't allowed Georgie, Lauren Free gets it. She was really good on just being an anchor for them down there. I think she went to the super shot and, was very accurate at the super shot too. Um, so yeah, she was going to be my pick. I don't have a whole lot of specificity to be honest, but I just remember watching their games and going, "Yep, the goal attack position definitely was someone of massive strength for that team." So let's go into now what I feel more comfortable about the rest of the squad. So, wing attack for me, you can't go past Alice Teagnell. I think she was incredible for them this year. I think her just especially in those two first games as well, even though she had a very inexperienced shooting end that she was feeding, she was still pretty strong. I think she was still learning how to feed them during those first two rounds, and I think maybe that's why people were going, oh, she can't do much without Janelle, but she was definitely the offensive anchor for them from minute one to, the final minute of the Vixens game, the final game. So I think, she steps up another level this season and her feed into Janelle is almost undefendable. So I think she should take massive pride in what she did this year and she'll look to continue to build. And I think being in that Diamonds environment for her is going to be crucial because I think, learning how to feed other players is almost an essential part of her role. And I think, she'll need to evolve soon. And I wouldn't be surprised if over the next couple of years she also notices that too, that she needs to be playing with a Australian diamond goal shooter or just an Australian goal shooter or a new shooter so that she can learn how to feed them and create another combination that she can bring into the diamonds environment so that she secures her spot when, players like Paige Hadley, Liz Watson and Kate Maloney, who over the next couple of years are more likely to be on the latter end of their career or retiring. So she has a massive opportunity over the next couple of years to really show that, she's the experienced wing attack and she has the ability to work with anyone.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you there. She was my pick as well. I had Paige Hadley in there for the first half of the season. But as we've said, she obviously missed those couple of games through injury towards the end. And yeah, I just think Alice was phenomenal, even as you said, those first couple of games where she wasn't feeding someone like Janelle, she was still able to always find that connection through to the attacking players. And yeah, steady with ball in hand. Not many wing defenses were able to get on top of her. And even in the grand final, she would have been one of Fever's best. I know we're not including the finals in our tally, but yeah, I just think she's steady. And I will be honest, she is a player that I've probably slept on for a couple of years, and not sort of probably given her the flowers that she deserves. But I think this year she's really come into her own, and especially in a year where maybe some of Australia's other attacking mid-quarters aren't quite standing up. I think Alice has really put her hand up and said, no, I'm not just going to be an invitee anymore. I'm going to actually get myself a proper Diamonds gig, and I'm really hopeful that she's able to get a debut towards the end of the year.
Yeah, I definitely think we'll see her featured during that South Africa series, at least just to test her, because, when else are you going to have the opportunity to test her with the Diamond schedule this year? But I definitely think centre, I remember I put Paige Hadley in, and I almost felt like I was cheating because at that time of the year she wasn't necessarily playing a whole lot of centre. She has now consistently played centre for the second half of the year, and you can't go past what Paige did this year. I think she has definitely been the primo Australian player in the competition for me personally. I think she was just so consistent, very low turnovers. She was the one that almost was trying to get her attacking shooters out of their rut, because there just seemed to be a lack of connection that ended up developing in that second half of the season, slash found out how to defend them. So I think what Paige was doing was, just being really punchy on attack. As I think Georgia described in our review last week, she's almost that filler player that normally just fills the gaps of the attacking end. But I think for what she did with the Swift this season, she really owned her role and almost, had either Verity or Grace White fill that gap, force them to be the fill the gap person, and she really took control of that attacking end. So yeah, Paige was my center for the mid season. She's my center for the end of the year as well.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I had Paige in wing attack for my first half, and I actually had Lisa My in my centre position for earlier in the year, but I'm gonna now shift Paige back to that centre position because, yeah, as you've said, she's just been phenomenal all year round. But I do also want to give a shout out, or honourable mention like we did earlier, to Kate Maloney as well. I feel like she's the heart and soul of that Vixens team, as we've seen, and I certainly think their turnaround in that back half of the season was a lot of the work that she did in that middle of the court, connecting with her shooters, connecting with the wing attack, and her just defensive pressure and just her pure passion for the team and the game. I think, yeah, she's definitely up there, and I think her and Paige are probably our two informed middies at the moment, which is potentially a controversial thing to say, that maybe we shouldn't be starting our Diamonds captain in our next couple of test series. But at the end of the day, if you want to win medals, you've got to pick who's informing at the moment. I think that's probably Paige and Kate out there on court together.
Exactly. But yeah, I definitely think for Australia to be on the top of the game, I think Paige is going to be that wing attack for them this year just because of how consistent she was with the ball and her low turnover rate, which we didn't necessarily see with every other Australian attacker as they all made that top five for SSN turnovers. So something for Stacey to look at this year. Sorry, guys. So wing defense. This was the position I found the second hardest. I think for me, there were two options, and I selected Kate Eddy as my mid-season. I was really close to giving her my end of season two. I think she was great, and I've been almost praising my namesake, your last name that she's ended up getting. So yeah, Keddy and Keddy, we love it. But I ended up actually going with Amy Sliger. I think she really built into the season. I think, at the beginning of the season, she was still, getting her role and almost getting that experience of having consistent game time. Um, I think last year she competed with Sammy Winders and Jamie Lee Price for that position. And, in the second half of the season, she uh, got a lot more game time. So this year, where she was guaranteed almost that wing defense position, I think it was hers to just fully take on and control. And she was incredible during that second half of the year. I think she really attacked the ball. She was very physical, but also almost played a little bit similarly to a space wing defense rather than a backpack wing defense. And I think that worked wonders for her to get defensive ball. She was the only defensive player in that top five for interceptions. So I think she should be, massively proud of what she did. And when I went to the game with it was the Giants versus the Lightning, and she smothered every person that they put in front of her, including Liz, who just couldn't figure out how to get around her, how to put the ball into the place that it needed to go. She almost had to always be doing plan B just based on how well Amy was marking either the goal attack or how good the hands over pressure was. So definitely, I'm very excited for Amy that she's going to be a Diamonds invitee this year. Well, I did say that I would have wanted her in the main squad, and I think they're gonna figure that out pretty soon. I think that she will be someone that they will want to elevate at some point. But yeah, special mention also goes to Katie. I think despite pretty inconsistent season for the Vixens at the beginning, she was kind of their shining light, and then everyone kind of rose to the party in that second half of the year, where she was still pretty consistent, and playing in that wing defense and goal defense position. And I'm pretty sad that she won't be in that Diamonds squad at all. I think she definitely deserves it. And they always talk about having versatility. Well, she was the best for the Vixens in wing defense and goal defense, so I don't quite understand how she wasn't there. But Georgia, now it's your turn. Who's your wing defense of the year?
I mean, you've already mentioned the two players that I was tossing up between. And yeah, again, I feel like that sort of recency bias potentially came into it. I know we'd sort of said that we weren't going to include finals players, and maybe we should have written down our teams before finals started so that we couldn't have that sort of bias come in. But I am going to actually go with Kate Eddy. In the end, I think, yeah, her, as you said, just consistency across that whole season for the Vixens and the protection that she gives those defenders behind her really enabled Joe Weston and Rudy Ellis to do what they do, which is then win the ball back. And I think The amount of the few amount of penalties that Keddy had is just unreal as a wing defence as well, and that's what really gives those players behind her that protection. Yes, Amy Sligo probably came out with a few more intercepts and sort of winning back ball, and then Keddy probably played more of that shutdown role. But I think you've got to sort of, as we know, each team has a different game plan, and I think the Giants knew that they probably weren't going to win a huge amount of ball at the back. They were going to have more of that shutdown role from their other two defenders. So yeah, they needed Amy to go out and win it herself. Whereas Keddy was playing more of that shutdown role. And I just think that consistency across the board is what I'm going to put her in my team for. And I had Shani Lambden in that spot in the first half of the year, who I think had a standout first half, as did most of those Swifts defenders. But I certainly think they got found out a little bit in that second half, and especially once they lost that flexibility of having Tegan O'Shaughnessy as well, I think that really sort of limited their defensive stocks a bit. So speaking of defensive stocks, next was the goal defense position, which I know was also one we both struggled at when we did our mid-season review. I picked Tara Hinchliffe, and I think, did you pick Ruby
Ruby
Bagwell?
Bagwell.
Yeah, so who have you gone for now that the season's all wrapped up?
I don't know if this is recency bias in terms of the season as the whole in the second half, but I ended up going with Erin O'Brien. I think she was a standout young player this year, and I think, she was all right in a goalkeeper. I'm not gonna give her the biggest props. Is it not as a to be rude, I think she just wasn't memorable in that goalkeeper position at the start of the year. And I think when she moved to goal defense, she was electric. And I think that's definitely why, she's been part of that Diamonds invitee list as an injury replacement. But I think what she did was incredible. I think she really used her hands over pressure. She's got a tall goal defense, and I think you could see that her fitness was evolving, being in that position too. I think every goal attack she ended up going up against, pretty much she shut down. And she's very good on the rebound. She's got really good anticipation. She was really good at getting very consistent interception ball and gain ball every game. And yeah, as we talked about earlier, that leadership of having Casey Korpua in there, she almost, you know, got the spirit of Casey through her and, ended up thriving in that position. So definitely, it ended up not being that hard. I think she was the second or third person I put down on my list after just how well she did in that second half of the year. And I think she'll next year, depending on what the Giants even look like, because I don't think there's been anything confirmed. I think all they'll be doing is trying to retain, the Amy Sligers, the Erin O'Briens, who necessarily wouldn't have been, the biggest stock of their payroll last year, and trying to keep them in the environment because, they will definitely be players that coaches are looking at for 2026.
For sure, yeah. Erin O'Brien definitely really came out firing in that second half of the year once she had that extra sort of leadership behind her and was pushed out to goal defence. So yeah, awesome to see her rewarded with a Diamonds invitee call up as sort of that injury replacement player. A nice sneaky way to get another player into the environment, which is really exciting. So the player I ended up going for was Sunday Ariang. I think out of all the other sort of Australian goal defenders, she was probably the most consistent across the year. And I think a lot of what helped that was the fever finally actually settled into a defensive lineup. As we mentioned in one of our previous episodes, it was probably our mid-season review, that throughout that first couple of weeks of the season when they had with Ariang in the side as well, Dan was almost too spoilt for choice and didn't know where to put everybody and kept feeling like he had to keep rotating them because he had all players that were starting seven quality. So, how can you blame someone for that? But I think once everyone got settled into their positions, which was typically your sort of your Katie Enterhaney at the back, your Sunday Ariang at that goal defence position, and then Fran coming on in either of those spots as sort of that more of an impact player. I think that was really where Sunday started to shine. She had a couple of monster games against Helen Housby and Steph Fretwell in the second half of the year, and especially against Kira Austin in that round 14 game as well. So yeah, I think seeing Sunday's performance in the last couple of weeks of the regular season has been really exciting for the Australian goal defence bib. And yeah, I think she was the one I was fairly happy to pop into that goal defence position.
Yeah, I think she was great as well. She would have been my second place, definitely. I think we move into goalkeeper now, and I wonder who we're going to pick because I think this was definitely yeah, big shock. Yeah, and yeah, I think if you saw any of our articles this year, any of our reviews, the Netball Scoop MVP award. I think it's pretty obvious who we're going to put at goalkeeper. We could probably say it in unison, but we're on Zoom, so it will be a bit lagged. So I have picked, I don't know if she's picked it, but I picked Latanya Wilson. I'm guessing you've
Yep,
done the same, obviously.
yep,
Um,
absolutely.
what are your, why do you think that, obviously, because she played several different positions this year, but what do you think that made her really solidify that goalkeeper position on both of our teams of the year?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in the first half of the season, especially because they had a few games where they still had Shamira in the team, Wilson was playing a bit more out at that wing defence position in that lineup that we typically saw from them last year. Versus then when Shamira was out, they were sort of experimenting between, that first game they had Sunray Visser just come in and fill that goalkeeper position. But then they sort of realised that no, having Laddie and Tilly on court was the best matchup, and it just then depended on who they were coming up against as to what position they sat in.
Mm,
And I think that was, at the mid-season, it wasn't, who's our goalkeeper or who's our goal defence or who's our wing defence. It was where do we put Laddie Wilson around everybody else? And we sort of figured that we could find players to fill those other gaps. So then it just made the most sense to put her back at goalkeeper. And I think it's her anticipation on the ball. She's not the tallest of players. I'd have to double check, but I think she's like 182 centimeters or
yeah,
something.
I think it's 181 or 182.
Yeah, I know there's been some banter content on the Thunderbirds social media about the height between her and Lauren
Mm,
Frew. Because I think she's trying to claim that she's the same height as Lauren Frew, and then you stand them next to each other and they're clearly not. With Lauren Frew being the taller of the two. So
mm,
yeah, I just think her athleticism is obviously, a true attribute that's so common amongst a lot of those Jamaican players. And again, that versatility, like I don't think we're ever going to see that same versatility that we've got in a Latanya Wilson in a player in a very, very long time. We could have easily
mm.
probably put her as our best wing defense, best goal defense, and best goalkeeper, if we'd wanted to. But yeah, I just think she was the most dominant and again the most consistent. I think a lot of players haven't probably had the most consistent seasons this year. But pretty much every game you could count on Laddie Wilson to get the job done compared to some of the other goalkeepers who would have really strong games, say against a moving shooter, but then might struggle against a holding shooter. Whereas Laddie can do it all. So yeah, not surprised that not only that she's popped up in both of our team of the years, but she also took out our Netball Scoop Player of the Year. I know I certainly had her as my number one player, and I think you've said that you did as well.
Yeah, I did too.
Yep.
I think she was just incredible. I think her, yeah, as you said, just that athleticism, which is, for as not saying she's a small player, but in comparison to like a Shamira Sterling, who, you know, Shamira combines her athleticism with, this towering presence and long limbs, where Latanya's almost like sneaky. She doesn't really necessarily give off the vibe that she's going to be able to get a lot of those balls against those tall shooters, but she does every single time. And I think a reason why in that semi-final that they had against the Vixens, I think a reason why that they didn't necessarily go through is because she that was probably her weakest game of the year, and I think it was because she wasn't necessarily in at goalkeeper. She played in at goal defense. For a good majority of the game, with Tilly Garrett actually going into goalkeeper, which isn't necessarily her top position either. So I remember thinking when I was watching that game, going, "This is a really interesting
Mm.
decision." And they hadn't necessarily played there all year, and I was going, "I just hope that they've figured that out." And they hadn't, sadly, figured out a way to make that work. But I think throughout the rest of the year, with Latanya being in at goalkeeper, I think it was very deceptive. She got great athleticism. She attacks the ball, which I really love seeing a goalkeeper do. And yeah, she just is a player that she's still technically, I would say, a player of the future too, despite being one of the best players in the world right now, I think, and MVP of the season from our point of view. I still think she has a lot of things to grow, but let's see what games we get of Jamaica this year because I know that they've got a series against England. There'll be one where we'll be hoping that a lot of those top players end up going to and not necessarily having that spell that they had against the New Zealand side where I think they only brought over like one SSM player for that series a couple of years ago. So we'll hope that, building into 2026, we see a lot more of those Jamaican players and playing international series because that will only grow their game. And, I think if they continue to build with such amazing players that they have and the potential all those players have, I think a lot of them will be on those SSN teams to the point where every SSN team will have one or two Jamaican player in there. Um, but yeah, so I'm actually going to put you on the spot. I've decided that
Right.
for our last thing is what is our coach of the year? Yeah, I know that's quite an interesting one. I don't necessarily even have an option. It just came to my
Oh,
head. So that's why I thought
right.
that I think there's a couple of good options though. I think that
Hmm.
it ended up being I wouldn't necessarily even go with like a Simone McInnes because of that beginning half, and that might just be a bit of bias towards the beginning. I think she even said herself that um, in the press conference for the grand final that she felt that the reason why they were performing that way and that why they were flat is because she was flat, and because she wasn't necessarily telling everyone that she had almost made the decision that she was going to leave the Vixens. So she felt that her demeanor and her reluctance to tell the squad to about her decision was almost inflicting them on them already. And she had that famous quote that we might as well go to the pub, and that that went viral in the team for the team, but also you could see that it raised their spirits a lot. That just have fun. And I guess if we were going based on the second half of the season, she'd be by far my coach of the year. Um, but do you have any thoughts on or should I keep rambling while you have a
No, I
decision?
think I've come up with something. Might be a little bit controversial. And again, it's probably a little bit biased towards the second half of the season. But I think I'm actually gonna go, and I'm regretting it more and more the more I get prepared to say it because this is so silly. I want to go with Julie,
I
just
was
because
going to say the same thing.
I think, everyone dragged her through the filth and read her to filth, dragged her through the mud for bringing in Casey Corpora and not investing in young Australian talent. But look what it did. It's gotten her two invitees into the Diamond squad with Erin O'Brien and Amy Sliger. And I think that's the mark of a true coach. It's not being okay, what's gonna, get us the most success now. She probably knew by that point already that their season was over. I can't remember at what round it was that Jodie hurt herself, but she would have known that their season was pretty much a write-off. So she said, rather than, yes, we could bring in another Australian player, but who are they going to learn from? What are they going to gain from it? They're going to be one of them's going to be on the court, but probably just getting hammered every week. So what can we
Mm,
do? Let's bring somebody else in that's got that experience that these players can learn off. And not only did those players benefit from it, I remember hearing in one of the interviews, which I think we've also talked about in one of our previous episodes, was her chatting to Joe Harton at one of their training sessions, and they were doing a drill or some match play, or whatever, and Joe kept passing out the ball to refeed it rather than just taking the shot. And Casey just looked at her and said, "What are you doing, mate?" Like
mm.
any, 10 years ago when we played together, 15 maybe, I don't know how long ago it was. We know they're both on the
Was
on
it?
the old
Well,
side.
okay, it wasn't that long ago. I think it was like
I'll
2015,
say it wasn't,
2016 at the
yeah, it
most.
wasn't too. It
Yeah.
was just before SSN started. But anyway, Casey basically said, "You always used to shoot that. What are you doing?" And Joe was like, "Oh, yeah. I do that, don't I?" So her game turned around. I think as soon as they started doing better, Jamie Lee Price obviously got into a lot better place because she's also got that established relationship with Casey. So yeah, again, probably more of a second half of the season choice, but yeah, that's what I'm gonna go for.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about it sitting here going, okay, do I go with the team that won 13 games in a row and Dan Ryan? But I just remembered their first two games and it was quite rocky. And, they obviously would have had a little bit of time to plan out how to work around the Janelle Fowler Neymar not being there. But, it still looked pretty rocky. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't go that route. And then I've obviously talked about Simone. And then I thought about that coaching masterstroke by Julie. And if you know some of our opinions about the Giants, and we've talked about this season, it was a bit like at the beginning going, what the is going on? And I think in that second half, that was a coaching masterstroke. And, maybe it wasn't all necessarily her influence, as we've just said that, little off comments from Casey and a little bit of, being on the court for Casey for those defensive players grew them to, such heights. But I think understanding exactly what your team needed in order to win is, that is the sign of a coach of the year. And, you saw them go from eighth place to I think they got sixth, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yep.
they could have, if they had started off with that team at the start of the year, I genuinely believe that they would have made playoffs. I just have it in my gut instinct that if they had a couple of more games, they would have made the top four. Not saying that they would have won the championship or anything like that. That's by
Don't get
far.
too carried away.
But like, yeah, I think they did really well. And I think they had really good support people around them. I think Julie was really smart in the players that she kept around the environment too, despite being injured, like Jodie Ann, Jodie Ann still had an influence in the environment. You could see that Gina Crampton also was quite influential in their environment too. And, their training partners like Liam Forcadia, who we would say congratulations on getting married, firstly. But he's such a strong player that would have been contesting those mid quarters every single week just to get better and better and better. So I think as well, there's a little bit of behind the scenes reasons as to why I would have given Julie that too, which were those reasons. But yeah, I think she ended up winning our coach of the year out of us two at least.
But yeah, I'm just interested to see what the teams look like next year. There's lots of potential for movement. Got two new coaches coming in as well, plus some really exciting international games coming up. So yeah, there's going to be little bit of a rest from this sort of stuff for a while, but then no doubt we're going to be back firing with it also. We've got the Netball World Youth Cup coming up, and then a whole raft of international series to cover, not only the Constellation Cup, but South Africa are coming over for a couple of series down under against both Australia and New Zealand, and then New Zealand are also heading up to the Northern Hemisphere to play England and Scotland, and then as we talked about earlier, Jamaica have got a couple of series as well. So we're still going to have netball coming out of our ears, and make sure you've got our episodes in your ears so that you can then listen to what we've got to say about it all. And we do still have a few of those more sort of sporting scoop interview episodes to drop as well. So we'll have one of those coming out next week that was recorded a few months ago. So make sure you stay tuned for that. This player is a fan favourite, so no doubt it'll be a really good episode to listen to when you're wondering what you're going to do with no netball to watch on TV. So yeah, make sure you stay tuned for that. And yeah, all the international stuff we've got to cover coming up later in the year.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for joining and watching today's video and getting to the end. And let us know your thoughts in the comments. We really love hearing your comments, and I always love, ending up replying. So definitely do it. And yeah, as she said, we're going to have a lot of more content coming your way. So please subscribe, please like the video, and tell us maybe some players that you'd love us to interview as well, because that will definitely be something that we'll be doing a little bit more during the international season. Yep, thank you guys so much for joining us in today's video, and we will see you next time. Bye now.
Bye.